They buried the first body under a willow tree. No headstone, no ceremony, just silence and a lie. It was 1865. Missouri still bled from the Civil War, but what settled in the soil that summer wasn't blood. It was something older, something colder. His name was Timothy Caldwell, 8 years old, blonde hair, pale blue eyes, skin so fair it blistered under sun. To most, he was just a quiet orphan sent to live with his uncle on a failing farm. But you're not most people, are you? You're here because something in your gut told you the official story was wrong. And you're right. This wasn't about a boy. This was about something inside a boy. A mind that didn't work like yours. A soul that, if it ever existed, had long since burned away. Missouri historians won't talk about this. The archives don't catalogue it. Even the local church records were scrubbed, pages torn out, names erased. But there was one man who didn't look away. Dr. Samuel Harding, a surgeon who'd seen men die with their intestines in their hands and still sleep that night. He met Timothy once and never slept right again. Let me ask you something. Have you ever looked into a child's eyes and seen nothing looking back? Not innocence, not curiosity, just calculation. Harding wrote about it in a journal never meant to be found. 3 volumes locked in a trunk beneath floorboards, discovered during renovations in 1921, then quietly destroyed, but not before one man transcribed them. What you're about to hear is his truth, and maybe yours. Because the story of Timothy Caldwell doesn't begin with death. It begins with a design, a quiet manipulation that infected a community and reshaped how we define evil. This is not a ghost story. It's not even about murder. It's about systems of control, masks of politeness, and how institutions protect monsters, especially when they wear the face of a child. You've been lied to, not just about Timothy, about how darkness works, about who wields it. And tonight, we go into the dark, together. Don't look away now, because once you know this, you never go back to sleep the same. Timothy arrived in the town of Coldwater Hollow on April 2nd, 1865, Palm Sunday. The war was days from ending, but the people still walked like ghosts, gaunt, grieving, God-fearing. Reverend Halberd called him a blessing in troubled times, a child rescued from some burned-out village in Tennessee, but no one could ever quite remember which village, and the boy never said. From the beginning, he was off, not in a way you could name. He smiled, nodded, said please and thank you, but the smiles never reached his eyes. He watched people, especially the older ones, the way a cat watches a mouse hole, patient, expectant, almost entertained. He was placed with his uncle, Josiah Caldwell, a farmer whose own son had died at Shiloh. Everyone said Josiah needed healing, and the boy could be his redemption. But within 2 weeks, Josiah was found dead in his barn, hanged. No note, no warning. The coroner called it grief, but the townsfolk whispered about the rope. Too neat, too high, and Josiah had a bad hip, couldn't have climbed up if he tried. Timothy never cried, not at the funeral, not once, just stood there, face blank, hands folded. When Reverend Halberd placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, the boy looked up and whispered something so quietly, the Reverend turned pale and left mid-sermon. He never spoke of it again. Then came the drawings. Charcoal sketches left under pews and tucked inside hymnals, twisted things with no eyes and too many teeth, women in black veils screaming, a man with no mouth dragging a coffin through fire. At first they blamed other boys, but no one else had the skill, or the imagination. That's when Dr. Harding got involved, called in by the town's matron to assess the boy's nature. What he found rattled him. Timothy didn't speak during the exam, not once, just stared, smiling slightly. Harding noted the pulse was calm, too calm. The boy's breath didn't quicken, even when exposed to sharp instruments or sudden loud sounds. No flinch reflex, no fear, just watching. Not a child, Harding wrote. A mimic, wears the skin of a child, but does not feel like one. Something was wrong, and it was just beginning. Dr. Harding didn't sleep that night. His journal entry for April 19th, 1865 begins with a line that still chills archivists. He blinked out of sync. Harding explained it like this. Every human has rhythms. Blinking, breathing, the micro movements that sync unconsciously with the room. With Timothy, something was off. His body responded to light and sound, but his awareness felt detached, like he was studying from behind his own eyes. He mimicked a child so well, Harding wrote, that one forgets to look beneath the surface until it slips. And it did. 3 days after Harding's exam, the body of Eustace Brimley was found near the woods. Coldwater Hollow's only gravedigger. Cause of death? Self-inflicted injuries. That's what the town sheriff, Levi Dent, claimed. But the autopsy, what little was recorded, told a different story. Fingernail marks on his own throat. Eyes burst from pressure, his tongue bitten clean through. The town tried to move on, as small towns do, but Harding couldn't. He'd visited Brimley the night before his death. The man was drunk, yes, but terrified. He kept repeating one thing: "I didn't dig just one hole." According to Brimley, a week before Josiah Caldwell's funeral, he was paid, in gold, to dig 2 graves. One for show, he said, and one to bury what came before the boy. Harding pressed him for more, but Brimley wept and shut down, said he heard scratching in the second hole after filling it. The next morning, he was dead. That's when the dream started. Harding wrote of black corridors, whispers in languages that reversed themselves mid-sentence. He began seeing shapes in candlelight, long fingers reaching out, pausing, watching. He became convinced Timothy wasn't sent to Coldwater Hollow by accident. He was planted, part of a ritual, or worse, an experiment. A quiet terror began to seep through the town, like rot veneer. At the floorboards, livestock were found dead, no blood, eyes missing. Children stopped playing near the well. Even the birds stopped singing near the Caldwell property. Timothy walked alone through it all, untouched, always smiling, always watching, but never playing, never crying, never blinking quite right. By early May, the town had begun to turn inward. Coldwater Hollow had never been a place of superstition, just simple God-fearing folk. But after Josiah's death, after Brimley, after the Reverend's sudden departure to an extended retreat, things started to unravel. And at the center of it all, Timothy. He never wandered far. He always seemed to be exactly where he was supposed to be, but just long enough for something strange to follow. Milk souring in sealed bottles, clocks stopping at 3:33, dead birds neatly arranged in spirals on doorsteps, always before Sunday service. But it was the children who truly knew something was wrong. They wouldn't play with him. They wouldn't even look at him. Clara Wilkes, age 7, said, "He talks to someone behind him." When her mother pressed further, Clara drew a picture in crayon. Timothy standing alone, but behind him, a long black shadow with its hands on his shoulders. The figure had no face, just a wide mouth, smiling. The drawing was burned that night, but the real horror came from the letters. In June, Mayor Alcott received a package from the Office of War Records, confirming something terrifying. No known casualties named Timothy Caldwell. No records of any rescue from Tennessee. No known relation to Josiah Caldwell either. Timothy had never existed in any official ledger. The town council panicked. They demanded Harding return, but he had already left. No note, no goodbye. Just an empty house, his journal open on his desk. The last entry? I looked at him through the mirror this time. It looked back and smiled in my voice. After that, the deaths became regular. Once a week, no pattern, no logic, no connection, except for one detail. All of them had spoken to Timothy within 48 hours before dying. By July, half the congregation had stopped attending church. The rest sat in silence, never turning their backs to the boy when he entered. They began calling him by another name. Not Timothy. The Echo. The Echo. No one remembers who first called him that. It wasn't said aloud at first, only whispered in corners, scribbled on notes passed beneath pews, scratched into wood beneath desks. But the name fit. Timothy, or the Echo, was never the origin of the horror. He was its reflection, its residue. A human shape left behind by something that had already passed through Coldwater Hollow, leaving its signature in blood and silence. On July 17th, a widow named Miss Eloise Granger was found sitting upright in her rocking chair, eyes wide open, heart stopped. No struggle, no sign of distress, just stillness. As if fear had calcified her from the inside, pinned to her lap was a note written in her own hand. He asked me what I remembered before I was born. That was the moment the town stopped pretending. They stopped letting the boy into homes. They stopped speaking to him at all. And still, he smiled. Never aging, never blinking quite right. Never afraid. A new ritual formed. Candles in windows, salt across thresholds, the Lord's Prayer repeated 3 times before dawn. But nothing worked. The echo was not a ghost. He was something older than death, more patient than evil, a presence that waited to be noticed. And when you noticed him, it was already too late. Around this time, a young woman named Miriam Dent, the sheriff's niece, began researching local folklore. She found references to something buried beneath Coldwater Hollow long before the town existed. Native accounts spoke of a mirror child, a being that appeared during times of war, famine, or mass burial, always taking the form of a child, always adopted, always bringing ruin. According to tribal elders, the mirror child did not kill. It watched, waited, and reflected the darkest part of a community back at itself. It grew stronger with fear, with attention, with belief. Miriam tried to confront the sheriff with what she'd found. He dismissed her. 2 days later, she disappeared. Her shoes were found at the well. Inside her home, on her vanity mirror, the words were written in ash. I liked her. She was loud on the inside. That same night, the well began to stink. The stench from the well was unbearable by morning. A thick, coppery rot hung in the air, clinging to clothes, seeping into floorboards, making even the livestock restless. Sheriff Dent sealed it off by noon, but locals said the smell wasn't coming from the well. It was leaking out of the ground. 3 more people vanished that week. No trace, no sound, not even a scream. One was Sheriff Dent himself. His cruiser was found just outside the church, driver's door open, engine still running. His hat was on the dashboard. On the windshield in greasy fingerprints, a message. He heard me this time. The echo was now everywhere. People stopped sleeping. They left plates of food out at night. Rituals from old wives' tales they never used to believe. At the general store, Mr. Kepler slit his wrists in the supply closet. In blood, he scrawled one phrase across the wall. He's learning our names. By August, Coldwater Hollow was unrecognizable. Curtains never opened. Doors remained locked day and night. Children were hidden away or sent to distant relatives. A few families fled entirely. The ones who stayed, they stopped asking who Timothy was. They started asking what he wanted. And still, he smiled. On August 21st, the last sermon was held in St. Augustine's Chapel. Only 7 people showed up. No hymns, no scripture, just silence, and Reverend Harding's journal, left open on the pulpit by someone unknown. The page read, "The echo isn't a spirit. It's a rehearsal, a memory trying to return. When we say his name, we bring the reflection closer to the source." A witness later claimed to have seen the boy walking through the empty church afterward, alone, barefoot, whispering into the confession booth. They didn't hear words, only weeping. The same person later went blind without cause. No medical reason. Just darkness. At this point, the town made a collective decay. They buried the name. They burned every record. Timothy Caldwell was no more, not legally, not spiritually, not in whispers. But memory isn't so easily buried, especially when it watches you from the mirror. The mirrors were the first to turn. No one noticed at first. A flicker here, a reflection that didn't quite match. A gesture seen in the glass that hadn't occurred in the room. Mrs. Clara Blevins, the schoolteacher, was the first to speak out. She claimed she'd seen her own reflection smiling when she wasn't, laughing when she was weeping, and in one terrifying moment, it walked away while she stood frozen, unable to move. She smashed every mirror in her home, then her windows, then finally her own head against the kitchen sink. When neighbors broke in, her blood had formed a perfect circle on the tiled floor. Inside it, in soap and scalp hair, was written, "Not me. Him watching through me." By September, mirror smashing became a town-wide obsession. Hardware stores sold out of hammers, reflective surfaces were painted over or shattered, rivers were avoided at sunrise and sunset, even spoons were discarded. But the Echo didn't need mirrors anymore. He had become one. People started mimicking each other involuntarily, blinking in sync, breathing in rhythm, repeating phrases they hadn't heard. It was as if Coldwater Hollow had become one body, one hive, with Timothy as its pulse. He didn't control minds. He synchronized them, made people forget who they were and remember who he had been. One boy, Elijah Top, tried to document it. He drew symbols, obsessively, over 1,000 sheets, none matching any known language. But experts later found an eerie pattern. Each symbol mirrored another from an ancient Proto-Sumerian dialect lost to history. Elijah died in his sleep, smiling. His autopsy showed a brain 5 degrees colder than normal, but otherwise healthy. Cause of death: emptied. Not long after, Pastor Wren, one of the last sane men in town, nailed a public notice to the church door. "We are not haunted, we are rehearsing. The boy is not a ghost. He is our Echo, Very kindness withheld, every cruelty buried, every sin never confessed. He is the sound of it bouncing back." And then came the worst realization yet. He wasn't just reflecting individuals, he was reflecting the town itself. They say every town hides a secret. But Coldwater Hollow wasn't hiding one. It was one. In the town archives, sealed beneath the old mill, there was once a ledger. Brown leather, burnt at the corners. It contained names, hundreds, most crossed out in red, some etched so deeply the paper tore. The oldest entry read simply, "Caldwell Timothy, marked, expunged, Echo class, Echo class." A term that didn't exist in any medical, legal, or religious registry. But according to a few surviving pages, it was a classification used by an obscure psychiatric faction in the 1850s who believed certain children didn't just remember trauma, they became it. They didn't inherit curses, they amplified forgotten ones. Timothy Caldwell had been admitted to St. Augustine's orphanage at age 5. No records of parents, no birth certificate, just a priest's handwritten note. Delivered by wind, cried with no mouth, marks on the tongue shaped like bells. The nuns noticed early that strange things happened around him, voices repeating after the source had gone, prayers echoing days later, and worst of all, other children began imitating him. Same gait, same speech, same blank stare. After 3 months, the orphanage closed, the church sealed the building. Timothy was listed as returned to sender. That was 1853. But in 1880, the first murder occurred. A local girl, 16, stabbed her mother 17 times while singing a hymn no one recognized. She claimed it was taught to her in a dream by a boy with no shadow. When interrogated, she said, "It's not murder, it's remembrance. That's what he wants." Every few decades, the pattern repeated. Always the same signs: vanishing livestock, mirrors cracking without force, churches echoing names that weren't spoken aloud, every time they buried the evidence deeper, until nothing was left but fear, rot, and denial. But secrets have weight, and in Coldwater Hollow the ground was cracking beneath it. What no one realized then was that Timothy Caldwell was never gone. He didn't die. He dispersed. Now every whisper, every glance, every regret you keep locked inside feeds him. He isn't looking for revenge. He's waiting for a reunion. Autumn arrived early that year, but it wasn't the chill that disturbed Coldwater Hollow, it was the silence. The birds stopped singing, the river no longer babbled, even the town's infamous wind, sharp and shrieking, fell mute. It was as if the town had exhaled and refused to inhale again. Inside the old schoolhouse, now abandoned and vine-choked, children's drawings remained on the walls. But something had changed. Faces that were once happy scribbles now appeared distorted, mouths open wide in oval screams. In one corner, scrawled in crayon, was a crude image of a boy standing behind a woman, his eyes hollow, his fingers stretching past the page's edge. Beneath it, a note: "He never left, he just got quieter." Dr. Hartley, the town's last practicing physician, began collecting stories from the remaining residents. Everyone was having the same dream. They were standing in a long hallway of doors. Behind each one, a memory they had buried, a lie they told, a sin they denied. And from the far end of the corridor, Timothy would walk, slow, deliberate, opening one door after another. But the doors didn't creak. They echoed. When Dr. Hartley tried to record these dreams in his journal, the ink ran in reverse. Sentences bled backward, and on the final page was a message. Stop trying to write him down. He is already written into you. That week, 12 residents disappeared. No forced entries, no blood, just silence. And in each of their homes, the same mark burned into the walls. A child's handprint facing outward, as if pressed from inside the surface. The mayor declared a state of emergency, but it was too late. The hollow had become a mirror. Every emotion repressed, every word unspoken. It echoed back louder, meaner, hungrier. They thought they were dealing with a ghost. But Timothy wasn't haunting them. He was becoming them, and the final echo was near. By late October of 1880, Timothy Caldwell's presence wasn't just a haunting. It was a pattern, a doctrine, a phenomenon the human mind couldn't decode. You see, science had tried, desperately, quietly. In 1867, 2 years after Timothy was first reported missing from St. Augustine's Orphanage, a private psychiatric institute in Boston, known only as the Morrow House, received a file. No cover letter, no signature, just a box. Inside were bloodied patient notes, sketches of a boy with fragmented limbs, and a wax cylinder recording labeled Caldwell Echo Test Number 3. When played, the recording featured no voice, no words, only breath. 12 seconds in, it matched the breathing patterns of all 12 scientists in the room, simultaneously, as if the device had mapped and mimicked their rhythms in real time. The test was never published. The team resigned en masse. One later wandered into the sea fully clothed, whispering, "He remembers us better than we remember ourselves." By 1881, Coldwater Hollow's town council decided to exhume Timothy's supposed burial site. What they found wasn't a body, but layers of fabric, cloth, parchment, stitched together and buried like flesh. Inside the folds were crude ink drawings, doorways, lungs, staircases leading to nowhere, and the repeating phrase, "Echo class, echo class, echo class." At that point, theologians entered the fray. Father Louis Marchand, a Jesuit historian specializing in pre-Christian possession law, insisted Timothy was not human, but a resonance, an imprint, like a bruise passed down through memory itself. He warned the town, "You cannot cure an echo, you can only silence the source." And so they tried. On January the 1st, 1882, Coldwater Hollow performed what came to be known as the Ritual of Stillness. No speaking, no movement. Every window draped in black. Every clock stopped. Not even the wind was permitted to stir. But when the sun rose, it wasn't over. It was inside. The town's children, every last one of them, spoke in unison. "We're sorry you forgot him." Then silence. Blood from the ears, and memory loss that would never heal. Science couldn't explain it. Religion tried to banish it, but truth was simpler. Timothy Caldwell never needed revenge. He needed a host. And Coldwater Hollow had already invited him in, through neglect, denial, and the one thing he fed on most. Memory, unspoken. By the winter of 1882, Coldwater Hollow was no longer just haunted. It was rewritten. Entire census records vanished. Property deeds reappeared with new names. Families that had lived there for generations opened closets to find portraits of strangers, Victorian boys with hollow eyes and bleeding palms. Timothy Caldwell's face was among them. But here's the catch. Not all of these portraits were painted. Some were burned into the wood, some etched into mirrors, and one was found beating like a human heart behind the wallpaper of the schoolhouse attic. They tried to burn it. The fire refused to spread. In response, the town elders sent a desperate letter to Dr. William Radcliffe, a neurologist from Providence who had once published theories on cognitive hauntings, psychic scars that infect not places but brains. He arrived under cover of night and brought with him a small group of savants, each one with a condition that let them see what others unsee. An epileptic sculptor, a mute girl who drew dreams she'd never had, and an old man who hadn't spoken since Gettysburg, but whispered Timothy's full name before stepping foot in the town. The group set up base inside the ruins of St. Augustine's orphanage. What they discovered wasn't paranormal. It was parasitic. Timothy wasn't appearing to people. He was replacing them. One by one. A child would vanish. In their place, another would arrive, wearing the same clothes, saying the same words, but with slightly off features. Teeth too perfect. Eyes too still. Movements that echoed before they occurred. Dr. Radcliffe documented one such event. A boy named Milo, age 9, vanished during a nap. When he woke up, he called his mother, Madam, recited German verses she'd never taught him, and drew a symbol in ash that hadn't been seen since Salem, 1692. Timothy's presence, Radcliffe concluded, was not linear. He didn't haunt time. He bent it, split it, made it echo forward and backward, until the entire town became a loop, repeating his version of reality. And then came the worst revelation of all. Every resident of Coldwater Hollow had once forgotten someone. A son, a cousin, a neighbor who vanished without notice. Timothy fed on that forgetting. Radcliffe's notes ended with a line that still chills historians. He is not seeking vengeance. He is seeking reconstruction, to make the world how it would have been, had we remembered him. By early 1883, the town's soil began rejecting the dead. Graves unearthed themselves. Coffins surfaced like bloated corpses. Even the cremated returned, ashes forming crude silhouettes in the shape of kneeling boys, fingers pressed to their lips in silence. Dr. Radcliffe's team had dissolved. 2 of them vanished without a trace. One, the mute girl, was found inside the chapel bell tower, her drawings tattooed across her skin in ink no one could remove. The final image showed Timothy, arms outstretched with veins like tree roots spreading through a map of the town. It was then they realized this wasn't a haunting. This was rewriting of bloodlines. Every family that remained had unknowingly descended from survivors of a forgotten massacre. One committed in 1865, one involving Timothy Caldwell. The town elders had lied. The boy wasn't just an orphan, he was a witness. Timothy had seen something. No one knew what, but after that night, 17 townspeople bound together to erase him, not just from life, but from memory. The bodies of those involved were buried beneath the church's foundation, sealed with salt and verses from forbidden apocrypha. But Timothy, he didn't stay buried, he fragmented. He became a language of trauma, a name whispered in dreams, a face you almost recognize, a story your grandmother never finishes. He lodged himself in the nervous system of the town, in its DNA. And now, anyone who bled in Coldwater Hollow, no matter how small the wound, became susceptible. People began writing in their sleep, foreign alphabets, backward scriptures. Children bit their tongues and spoke truths no one had taught them. One man slit his palm on a fence post. Within a day, he remembered a brother he never had, a boy who used to sit beside him on the riverbank humming funeral hymns. The memory ended with the sound of a bell tolling, but Coldwater had no bells. Radcliffe returned to the orphanage alone one night, attempting a final experiment. He injected himself with blood recovered from Timothy's original hospital gown, preserved in wax since 1865. At 3:33 a.m., he wrote one final entry in his journal. It's not possession, it's substitution. He does not force himself in. He simply replaces what we no longer defend. He then vanished. No footprints, no signs of struggle. Just a single child's voice on the phonograph whispering, "Thank you for remembering." And the recordings have never stopped. By the spring of 1883, Coldwater Hollow was silent, but not empty. Shutters closed themselves at dusk, candles extinguished without wind, clocks slowed when Timothy was near. But the bell, that infernal bell, rung at precise intervals. 3:33 a.m., 6:06 a.m., and again just before sunset. The bell was not part of any building. No one remembered installing it. No one remembered hearing it before Timothy. It rang across the fields, echoed through forest hollows, and settled in the lungs like fog. People described it differently. To some it sounded like church bells, to others like a scream underwater. But all agreed on one thing. When you heard it, you remembered something you shouldn't. Clara Jennings, once a schoolteacher, began bleeding from her ears the moment the bell rang. When she awoke, she spoke perfect Latin, despite never learning the language. She recited verses from a book of hollow blood, a text that doesn't exist in any academic registry. In one chilling entry, Clara whispered, "Timothy was never born. He was echoed into existence." Dr. Radcliffe's journal, found in the charred ruins of St. Augustine's, revealed a horrifying discovery. The bell could only be heard by those who were in process, that is, being overwritten. The ringing marked a phase shift, when Timothy's memories began to root themselves in another host. People who heard the bell would soon remember growing up with him, sharing secrets, holding his hand as fire consumed their school. They'd remember things they never lived. These implanted memories weren't passive, they erased real ones. A farmer forgot his wife's name but remembered Timothy's handwriting. A mother no longer recognized her child, only a boy she used to read stories to beneath the staircase. By summer, entire households fell into reverie. Meals were left untouched, jobs abandoned. They gathered at the old cairn, orphanage site, and stood in silence. No sermons, no commands, just waiting. Waiting for the bell. When it rang, low, metallic, but alive, they bowed their heads as if in prayer. One child placed a copper penny in his mouth and spoke. His blood sings in bells, his breath moves the air. We are all echoes now. Local newspapers refused to publish what was happening. Outsiders stopped entering the town. And those who did? They heard the bell too. One man from Baltimore entered to investigate. He returned home and burned every photograph of his son. When asked why, he replied, "Because that wasn't my son. That was Timothy." Trying again. By the spring of 1883, Coldwater Hollow was silent, but not empty. Shutters closed themselves at dusk. Candles extinguished without wind, clocks slowed when Timothy was near. But the bell, that infernal bell, rung at precise intervals, 3:33 a.m., 6:06 a.m., and again just before sunset. The bell was not part of any building. No one remembered installing it. No one remembered hearing it before Timothy. It rang across the fields, echoed through forest hollows, and settled in the lungs like fog. People described it differently. To some it sounded like church bells, to others like a scream underwater. But all agreed on one thing. When you heard it, you remembered something you shouldn't. Clara Jennings, once a schoolteacher, began bleeding from her ears the moment the bell rang. When she awoke, she spoke perfect Latin, despite never learning the language. She recited verses from a book of hollow blood, a text that doesn't exist in any academic registry. In one chilling entry, Clara whispered, "Timothy was never born. He was echoed into existence." Dr. Radcliffe's journal, found in the charred ruins of St. Augustine's, revealed a horrifying discovery. The bell could only be heard by those who were in process, that is, being overwritten. The ringing marked a phase shift, when Timothy's memories began to root themselves in another host. People who heard the bell would soon remember growing up with him, sharing secrets, holding his hand as fire consumed their school. They'd remember things they never lived. These implanted memories weren't passive, they erased real ones. A farmer forgot his wife's name but remembered Timothy's handwriting. A mother no longer recognized her child, only a boy she used to read stories to beneath the staircase. By summer, entire households fell into reverie. Meals were left untouched, jobs abandoned. They gathered at the old cairn, orphanage site, and stood in silence. No sermons, no commands, just waiting. Waiting for the bell. When it rang, low, metallic, but alive, they bowed their heads as if in prayer. One child placed a copper penny in his mouth and spoke. His blood sings in bells, his breath moves the air. We are all echoes now. Local newspapers refused to publish what was happening. Outsiders stopped entering the town. And those who did? They heard the bell too. One man from Baltimore entered to investigate. He returned home and burned every photograph of his son. When asked why, he replied, "Because that wasn't my son. That was Timothy." Trying again. By early autumn, whispers began of children seen in two places at once. At 7:04 p.m., Miss Lavinia Wexley reported young Grace Harper tending to her goats in the meadow, but her mother swore Grace hadn't left the house. That same evening, Reverend Kingsley claimed he saw Timothy and 6 other children crawling across the chapel ceiling like shadows painted wrong. It wasn't hallucination. It was replication. Some force had learned to duplicate memory, form, and presence. These children weren't ghosts. They interacted, spoke, and wept. But when questioned, they always answered with the same phrase: "We live where the air forgets." When renovators dared to dig beneath the charred remains of St. Augustine's, they discovered more than ash and burnt pews. Beneath the floorboards were alcoves carved into stone, each the size of a small child's body. Some were filled with old toys, wooden tops, a rusted doll's eye, buttons in a silk pouch. But others had teeth. Loose, human, baby teeth. Hundreds of them, and above each alcove, scratched in the wood, a name: Timothy, 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 dozens. But all were spelled slightly different. Timothy, Timothy, Timothy. As if someone or something had been trying to reconstruct a name from corrupted memory. Then came the recordings. Phonographs left in the chapel recorded a lullaby with no known origin, sung in a child's voice, barely audible, looping endlessly. "Don't look down where I was hid. I sleep in mouths that tell no fib. If you forget, I'll wear your name. If you resist, you'll dream the flame." The voice was always the same, but the accent changed. Southern drawl, Bostonian clip, even a guttural European tone. Some experts said the recordings were faked, but one audio analyst in New York suffered a breakdown. He claimed the voice matched no known human frequency. At night, townsfolk began hearing small hands tapping beneath their floors, scratching behind mirrors, giggling from basements they never built, and when they opened trapdoors or tore up floorboards, nothing. Except once. Mrs. Henley, aged 72, opened the floor of her pantry after hearing humming. Inside, sitting cross-legged on the dirt, was a boy with Timothy's face, but eyes completely black. He held a cracked mirror and whispered, "You dropped this." It wasn't hers. It was her mother's. Lost in 1844. And when she looked again, both mirror and boy were gone. The town sealed its floors, nailed down every board, salted the windows, and burned every toy. But it was too late. The children were already inside, not hiding, just waiting for the rest to forget. 6 weeks after Dr. Waller disappeared into memory's end, the postmaster of Ashford Hollow received a letter sealed with red wax bearing the Waller family crest, which had not been seen since 1811. The paper was brittle, the handwriting not quite human. Every stroke of ink jittered unnaturally, like it had been scrawled by a hand resisting another force. Yet the return address was unmistakable: Caldwell home for the incurable and forgotten. But that place hadn't received mail in over a decade. The envelope contained only 3 sentences. Timothy was never sick. I was never his doctor. And this house was never meant for the living. The letter was dated July 13th, 1865. The exact day the house disappeared from county records. Investigators, both state and scientific, flooded the area. None could find the building. Gone, not a stone, not a trace of foundation. Where the house once stood was only overgrowth and silence. But the townspeople whispered something stranger. They saw the house, but only at night, and only from the corners of their eyes. If they turned to face it, it was gone. If they ignored it, it stood there, breathing. Some claimed to hear a soft scratching near their windows in the hours before dawn. Others found soot prints shaped like small feet leading to their doors. The local pastor, Reverend Greenfield, swore he heard voices in the bell tower murmuring, "The doctor is awake again. Shall we remember him too?" One night, a second letter arrived. This one addressed directly to the Reverend. "You told the town I was damned, but I only opened the door. You preached fear of the unknown. But Timothy was the unknown. And now so are you." The Reverend was found the next morning, barefoot, eyes wide open, dead on the church floor. His fingernails were charred and his lips stitched shut. The stitches were made from baby's hair. That week, 13 other letters arrived, each addressed to someone who had touched Timothy's life, a nurse who ignored his screams, a classmate who laughed at his limp, a historian who denied his existence. All 13 recipients vanished within days. Their homes remained untouched, their clothes still hung on lines, but their clocks, every single one had stopped at 3:33 a.m., each tick etched in silence, each echo felt in bone. What haunts Ashford Hollow today is not a ghost, not a disease, not a boy. It is a question, one sealed in envelopes and whispered in dreams. What if the cure never existed? What if he was the cure? And worse, what if he's writing to you next? Behind the Caldwell home's main staircase was a narrow, hidden corridor, one not drawn on any blueprint, nor acknowledged in any physician's ledger. Local children called it the Tithing Room. The name wasn't random. It was whispered that every new child brought to the home, especially those diagnosed with abnormalities, was quietly taken there their first night, and not by candlelight, but by shadow. The room was small, no more than 8 feet across, with stone walls slick from decades of condensation or sweat. Beneath the floorboards, townsfolk claimed they could hear scratching, ticking, and sometimes singing. An investigator from the Eastern Medical Society, Jonas Greaves, illegally entered the property in late 1865. He was convinced the tales of Timothy were mass hysteria, fueled by religious fear and rural superstition. But he left behind only his journal, found in the snow months later, open to one passage. This is not a place of healing, this is a mouth. And Timothy was never the patient, he was the offering. I have seen the tithing ledger. It lists names, dozens, hundreds, each with a date, each scratched out except one, mine. Next to his name in red ink was the word, accepted. He was never seen again. The tithing room held more than dust and rot. It held contracts, written not in ink, but in dried blood and ash. Each contract contained a child's name, a date of arrival, and a disturbing line, to be rendered unto the cause of understanding, soul and marrow. Dozens of these contracts were signed not by a doctor, but by an entity called the curator. Scholars tried to trace the name, but there was no living or dead physician of that title in any U.S. archive. Until one man, Professor Adlai Moore from Harvard's Department of Occult Sciences, claimed the curator predated the Civil War by at least 200 years. Not a man, not even a spy. Writ but a role, filled over centuries by those who found the unexplainable and chose to feed it. It is believed Timothy was chosen not for what he suffered, but for what he stopped others from discovering. Each time a researcher drew near, the boy grew worse. He broke light bulbs with his mind, made men dream of their childhood screams. He burned pages from sealed archives, without fire. Timothy wasn't sick. He was sentineling something, something beneath the tithing room. And someone, or something, was paying a heavy tithe to keep it there. Until the ledger ran dry. And now, the room is gone, bricked over. But sometimes, even today, a faint red glow bleeds through the mortar. And beneath the church bell at midnight, the townsfolk swear they hear one more word, deep and echoing, accepted. The bell tower overlooking Briar Hollow was built in 1823, but it wasn't meant to summon townsfolk to prayer, not originally. Its first function, long forgotten by most, was containment. The bell didn't call, it warned, and only one man knew when to ring it. Elias Thorne, the bell ringer. He was 93 years old in the winter of 1865, hunched, mute, half-blind. And yet every time something stirred in the Caldwell house, Elias would climb the 187 narrow steps with a lantern clenched between trembling fingers and ring that bell 13 times. Never 12, never 14, just 13. Exactly. No one ever asked him why. Not seriously. Because if you lived long enough in Briar Hollow, you stopped needing to ask questions. You learned when to keep your head down and when to run. The last time Elias rang the bell was the night Timothy screamed without sound, mouth open wide, eyes rolled white, chest convulsing like a fish dragged onto ice. It lasted only 8 seconds. But every animal in a 5-mile radius fled into the woods. Birds died mid-flight, babies stopped crying and didn't breathe again. And then, silence. Elias rang the bell at midnight and collapsed. They found him on the top platform, both hands wrapped tightly around the rope, his lips frozen in a silent plea. A single word scratched into the wood beside him. Remember. That same night, the town clock stopped at exactly 12:13 a.m. Every one of the Caldwell home's windows shattered inward. All 26 children fell into a simultaneous catatonic state. And Timothy vanished. Not fled, vanished. His bed untouched, his clothes neatly folded, a black feather placed on his pillow, not from a raven, not any bird known to science. Hollow, yet heavy, bone-like, warm to the touch. It was delivered to the town sheriff, who resigned the next day and walked into the sea. His boots washed up 2 weeks later, perfectly tied. They say Elias Thorne knew the truth, that the bell didn't protect the town from Timothy. It protected Timothy from the town. Because once he was gone, things began to leak. Old rooms unlocked themselves. Dead doors creaked open. The river turned a strange, iridescent color every new moon. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right, you could hear Elias's bell ringing in the distance, 13 times. Always 13. But now no one is left to climb the tower, and the thing Timothy held back? It's listening again. Waiting. They tried to examine what remained. After Timothy's disappearance, an emergency board of county physicians arrived in Briar Hollow, men of rational science, dressed in wool, pride, and ignorance. Most didn't believe the stories. They believed in bodies, organs, nervous systems, brains, something they could slice. They demanded permission to exhume the small, unmarked grave in the back of the Caldwell estate. It had no name, no records, but the townsfolk had whispered for years that whatever was buried there wasn't human. And if it was, it didn't die naturally. Dr. Harrison Lyle took the lead, scalpel in hand, with a grin. "We'll put an end to this superstition," he scoffed. They unearthed the body in silence. At first, it resembled a child, small, curled, skeletal, but there were anomalies. The spine had 27 vertebrae instead of the standard 24. The skull was fused at impossible angles. The eye sockets were too deep, hollowed, and there were no fingernails, only soft black ridges like feather quills. Still, they proceeded. They opened the chest cavity. Inside was no heart, just a hollow space filled with teeth. Rows upon rows, hundreds, tiny, translucent like baby teeth, but not formed in a jaw. They floated freely, suspended in black fluid. Then the first scream came. Dr. Lyle dropped his scalpel, his eyes glazed over. He muttered a string of numbers no one understood. 13, 172, below the whispering. And then he drove the scalpel into his own throat. The second physician fled screaming, never to be seen again. The third, Dr. Wexler, stood frozen, hand trembling before uttering a single phrase. He was never sick. He was hatching. They burned the body that night. No ceremony, no records, no science. But the smell of the smoke, it didn't drift upward. It clung to the ground like fog, like it was watching. And days later in the ashes, someone found something the flames couldn't destroy. A small object, smooth, warm, pounding with the faintest beat. A heart. Not human, not known. It said they locked it away in the Briar Hollow Historical Society, 3rd floor, behind the red velvet curtain. But locals swear it moves, shifts, taps against the glass, as if waiting for something, or someone. And whenever it does, birds fall silent, dogs howl, and the number 13, always 13, carved into frost, wood, even the backs of mirrors. The last person to inspect it, gone, vanished, and in his place, on the floor, a single black feather. Timothy's calling card. There are stories, and then there are warnings. Timothy Caldwell's story was never meant to be told, not in sermons, not in science, not even in whispers. Yet here we are, at the end of what should have been a myth. And still, he lingers. After the incident with the dissection, Briar Hollow quietly collapsed into itself. Families moved, schools shut down, churches boarded their windows. The Caldwell estate was officially condemned by 1871, but no one had the courage to demolish it, because strange things kept happening. Every 13 years, exactly on the spring equinox, someone would vanish, always a child, always alone, always left-handed. The town's historians, those who dared stay, began calling it the Caldwell cycle. One reporter, Merrill James, attempted a documentary in 1926. She documented everything: old journals, medical reports, letters, and even a sketch of the dissection findings. She disappeared mid-shoot. Her footage recovered, but melted, like the film had been boiled from the inside. The last frame showed a boy's silhouette staring into the lens, smiling. That smile has now become folklore. Some say you see it in dreams. Some say it appears in frost on the window, grinning, dripping with condensation like tears. Others say it shows up in photographs after they've been taken. As for the Caldwell name, buried, literally. The family line ended when Esther Caldwell, Timothy's only living sister, threw herself into a well in 1873. Her final words, scribbled on a chapel wall, read, "He isn't gone, he's beneath everything, and he's awake now." They sealed the well, but the stones around it cracked every winter, like something was breathing. Modern researchers call the case unsolvable. They dismiss it as Victorian hysteria or some family-based psychosis. The footage, the journals, the whispers, they claim it's all misremembered. But those who've stepped into the Caldwell property know better. They've seen the dark shape in the attic window. They've heard the soft flutter of feathers with no birds in sight. And on some nights, if you wait in silence behind the property fence, you'll hear something from the basement. A quiet scratching, like fingers on stone, 13 times, always 13. And then the whisper, "Timothy." This isn't just a story. It's a pattern, a ritual in motion. And one day, someone curious, someone bold, maybe someone watching this video, will go to Briar Hollow, stand at the gates of the Caldwell ruin and knock. Just once. And if the wind is still, something will knock back. But it won't be from inside the house. It will be from beneath your feet. Because Timothy Caldwell was never buried. He was planted, and now he's ready to grow.